Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm here today with a reading update. This is going to be basically the books that I read in July with a couple of books that I also read in June thrown in for good measure. This is my third and last attempt at doing this video because I just sat here literally for 45 minutes recording a video only to find out that I wasn't actually recording. I had forgot to hit the record button. So I'm feeling a little defeated right now. So we're going to try this again. So I'm just going to get started and let's go. So the first book I read in July was Woolfall by Hilary Mantel. This is a interesting retelling of the life of Thomas Cromwell, who of course was a very central figure in the Tudor era. He was pretty much Henry VIII's go-to right-hand man. And in sort of history, he has always been looked at as very much of a villain, and this is a very interesting sort of spin on his life where he's put not necessarily completely positive light, but you definitely feel a little bit more sympathy towards him than you have in previous things that I've read, at least. And it starts when he's a boy, and this runs through till pretty much the end of Henry's marriage to Anne Boleyn. There's it's a 3-book series. She just completed it, and I have the other 2 books. I was a little confused by who was who at some points because in the book they're always referring to him and he, and that's how they talk about Thomas. He's him, he's he. And it was a little disorienting at first, but I still really liked it, and I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. So I've been very fortunate over the last couple of months digging myself out of this incredibly long reading slump that I was in and discovering 3 authors that I absolutely love and that are now 3 of my favorites. And this is one of them. And I technically read a book by him last year, but this is really when I sort of embraced my love of this author. And I usually don't like essays or nonfiction, but I guess that's changing because the person that I'm talking about, David Sedaris, he is a humor essayist. He writes some fiction too, but mostly he's known for his humorous essays about his family and his life, and he's just amazing. Whether I'm reading one of his books or listening to his audiobooks, I enjoy it thoroughly, and even if I'm reading a physical book, I still, in my head, will hear his voice. He has such a distinctive speaking voice, and it just makes it even more enjoyable. So the 4 books that I read by him since June is this, which is Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim, which is probably my favorite book by him. I just freaking loved it. And I also read When You Are Engulfed in Flames, Naked, and Me Talk Pretty One Day, which is one of probably his most famous book. But I read all 4 of them, and I loved all of them. Next up, My Lovely Wife by Samantha Downing. And I got this book and had no idea what I was getting myself into. And I think that was probably for the best because I ended up loving this book so much. There are several books lately that I have found that if you go into them knowing very little about them, you end up enjoying it more. So I'm not going to tell you too much about this. This book is about a married couple. The wife's name is Annabelle. They never refer to the husband. He's the narrator of the book, but they never say what his name is. And they seemingly have this perfect marriage. They have kids. They have a great life. And, oh, by the way, their favorite hobby is killing people. You know, that's how they spice up their marriage. So that's pretty much all I'm going to say, because the bananas, bonkers, insane scenarios that happen in this book are crazy, and you really need to experience them yourself in order to fully appreciate how insane this book is. I really love Samantha Downing's writing style. I love the fact that she's very unapologetic about writing about incredibly unlikable characters, but it doesn't matter because she does it so well that you can't help but enjoy the story. And I love the way she creates a story. She's not afraid to go bananas. She's not afraid to write these incredibly weird and wacky scenarios and she somehow makes them work, and I loved it, and I gave this 4.5 stars. I thought the ending was a little drawn out, but other than that, I loved it, and highly recommend it. Okay, next up is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I was super excited when I heard about this book, just the whole concept of it. It is about a fictional rock and roll band from the 70s called Daisy Jones and the Six, and it is told almost entirely through interviews. And I am a big fan of books that are told in different ways, like with interviews or articles, and like video footage, that kind of stuff. I think if done well, they can be really entertaining. And I thought it was done very, very well in this book. I kind of lost myself in the story to the point where they felt like a real band, and I think that's very important. It almost feels like you can go on iTunes and buy one of their albums. I also listened to part of this book on audio, which I highly recommend because they have all different narrators, and the narrators work really, really well. It was sad, kind of bittersweet, but I really enjoyed it, and I love Taylor Jenkins Reid's style of writing. I'm not a big fan of contemporary fiction, and I know that's what she mainly writes, but I was very impressed with this book, and I gave it 4.5 stars on Goodreads. The next book that I finished in July is one that I've sort of been reading in bits and pieces probably for the last 2 years, and it is Cold Days by Jim Butcher. This is book 13 or 14 in the Dresden Files series, which I have loved for years and years and years. And really the only sort of sci-fi / urban fantasy series that I'm still reading. And I will always read these books. I will always read about Harry. Unfortunately for me, over the last few years, I kind of have fallen into a little bit of a trap where I'm sort of viewing my opinion of the author in real life and kind of mixing it up with the stories he writes. I find Jim Butcher a little problematic in real life. That's just my issue, and it really shouldn't matter when I'm reading one of his books, but it kind of is always in the back of my head that I don't really like him as a person for a couple of reasons. But anyway, this is not the strongest book in the series. I mean, I just remember when I first started this series, I would fly through them so quickly. I read them back to back to back to back. So this book is, like I said, I think it's number 14 in the series, and it deals with Harry sort of coming to terms with a lot of the things that happened in the previous book, Ghost Story, and sort of dealing with having to be the summer knight. Is that the term? Summer knight, I believe. And he has new powers that are kind of scary but also helpful, and sort of the aspects that are sort of from the beginning of the series. There's always been part of him that sort of wanted to veer off into the dark side, but he managed to control himself, and it's becoming harder and harder and harder to do that now with these new powers. So it's him trying to, come to terms with that. I think it was a little long. It's a chunker, and I did overall enjoy it. I like the forward momentum of the storyline, and I still adore Harry as a character. I did enjoy it overall, and I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads. I don't know if I said that already. I'm really feeling like defeated because I was just really into the last video that I was doing, which actually wasn't a video because I forgot to push record. Anyhow. So next up, we are at the second of the 3 authors that I informed you that I fell in love with and are now one of my favorite authors of all time. And that second author is David Mitchell. And the book that I read is The Bone Clocks. Oh my goodness. This might be a very strange book to pick as the first book you read by this author. So one of the things David Mitchell is known for is his writing style. He tends to break his books up into sections, and each section can almost be read as a separate little short story, but in the end, all of the short stories sort of interconnect and they make sense together. This is very much true of this book. And also, all of his books tend to be in the same overall universe. So some of his characters appear in book after book, which I love. I just love that kind of stuff. But this book is also broken up into sections, and it takes place from it starts in 1984 and ends in 2043. And the sort of one uniting character who appears in each of the sections at different stages of her life is a character named Holly, like the name, who very unwittingly becomes a central figure in this war between these two groups of people who happen to be immortal. And I'm not going to really tell you too much more about the book because, again, I think you need to experience it yourself. This book is beautiful. It's incredibly well written. It's a chunker. It's a huge book. And all the characters, a lot of characters, a lot of different timelines. And somehow he makes everything work. He makes everything understandable. I gave it 5 stars. Now, of course, when I finished reading Bone Clocks, it makes sense that I would read what is considered to be a companion piece to the Bone Clocks, which is Slade House. And as much as I loved the Bone Clocks, I loved this book about 10 times more. It is 238 pages of awesomeness, and I can't. I can't. So every 9 years, a mysterious iron door appears in an alleyway, and it leads to this house. And every person that goes through this doorway experiences the house in a different way. Different occupants, different situations. And it connects very closely to this book because the overall underlying theme of this book is carried over into this book. And there are a few characters that overlap, and the underlying theme in this book, you get a lot more explanation to the details of the theme in this book. But as to which book you should read first, I tend to think you should read this. I think you would enjoy Slade House much more having read The Bone Clocks. But you can totally read this book first. I just convinced one of my best friends to get this book because I figured she would like this. And I think it's also a really good starting point to decide if you like his writing style before you tackle like a 600-page book like The Bone Clocks. So I love this book so much. I could sit here for an hour and just gush. It's amazing. If I could give it 10 stars, I would. It's just fantastic. The next book I want to talk about is, unfortunately, the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a book that I was really, really looking forward to. I had it pre-ordered for months. Bought the hardback, and I don't know if you guys have noticed, but on Amazon, hardbacks are not cheap anymore. Bought the hardback of this book because I was so incredibly excited for it, and could not have been more disappointed. And that book, Devolution by Max Brooks. I thought the concept of big feeters, I'm going to call them big feeders. I thought the concept of a book about a big feet massacre sounded amazing. Now, let me just tell you, World War Z, the movie is one of my favorite movies. I think it's one of the best horror/zombie films ever made. Now, I know the book of World War Z is very different than the movie. Having said that, the book bored me to tears. I tried many, many times to read that book, and I couldn't get into it. I know it's beloved by many people, but I just didn't like it. Remember how I said I like books that are told in a different way with interviews and stuff like that? This is a prime example of that just not working here. So this book is about this sort of green, eco-friendly commune that sets up camp, sort of very isolated section of, I believe, Washington. And a volcano erupts, and when the volcano erupts, this commune is sort of cut off from civilization. And when this happens, they end up being invaded by this family of big feeders. And chaos ensues. My problem with this book is that I absolutely hated the main character. She was obnoxious. She just was ridiculous. Very narcissistic, but yet also one of those people who sits and feels sorry for themselves constantly. And I can't stand. That's one of my least favorite character traits. I can't stand it. And I hated her, and I pretty much rage read this book to the end because I paid full price for it. Damn it, I was going to finish it. Hated it, gave it 1 star. And finally, the last book I want to talk about is my new favorite book of all time. And I don't take that lightly. I don't change favorite books very often. So when it happens, it's a big thing for me. And I'm just going to hold the book up. I don't really even need to tell you what it's called, because everybody knows what it is by this point. I love this book so much. I do. I don't think I've ever read a book that just made me so full of happiness. And it was exactly the right book that I needed at exactly the right time. There's not a word of dialogue, there's not a situation, or even a bit of grammar that I would change in this book. I loved every single thing of it. If you don't know, this book is about Count Alexander Rostov, who in 1922 was considered a bit of a rebel because he was known for writing a poem that sort of upset the government in Russia. But he has friends in high places, let's put it that way. So they couldn't have just blatantly executed him or thrown him into a jail for the rest of his life. So instead they sentenced him to house arrest at the Hotel Metropole in Moscow. And it is told over the span of about 30 years of him living in this hotel, the people that he interacts with, and all of the very tumultuous circumstances that are going on outside the hospital, outside the hotel in those 30 years. And this book is pure joy. I loved it. It made me laugh several times. It made me cry several times. It almost gave me an anxiety attack getting towards the end of the book, because I really thought it was going to go in one direction, and it ended up going in a different direction that just was so much better and perfect in my opinion. And it had such a great ending, a really great ending. So that's it, guys. That's pretty much what I read over the last month. Thank you so much for watching. I'm almost positive this video is actually recording now. So if you're watching it, it means I know how to press a button on a computer screen. Go me. Anyway, thanks so much for watching and sticking with me with my channel. And I look forward to talking to you very soon. And as always, you guys, happy reading.